Now I hope this is of some interest. It's a bit like days gone by when you come back from a holiday and you dragged everyone around for a slide night. It's not quite as bad as that. But anyway, this is the Omaka Air Show, which alternates with the Wanaka one. We went the last year. That was myself, John Hinton, who's the president of the Aeronautical Society. He's overseas at the moment, and Graham Cottrell. And unfortunately, Graham's not up to coming on to the meetings these days. Graham is the Kiwi. He's the one that has sort of renovated all the engines at the museum, and he has a vast knowledge of old aircraft, etc. And when he turned around and says, "Does anyone want to go to Omaka?" I said, "Yeah, I'll come." And not knowing, I'd never heard of Omaka before. I heard about Wanaka, but I never heard of Omaka. And I certainly didn't know anything about all the other places that we finished up going to. We went for 3 weeks, and we went to the Omaka show to start with, and then we hired a set of wheels and we drove all around New Zealand. The Kiwis are phenomenal for keeping bits and pieces and restoring bits and pieces, and as you probably know, people from all over the world send their bits and pieces to New Zealand, they put them back together, and then they go back to Duxton or America or whatever the case may be. Of course, only 2 weeks before we got there was the, or not so much 2 weeks, but 2 months was the earthquake, and that was quite phenomenal. That the hotel we were booked into was one of the few hotels that wasn't damaged, and it was right next to New Zealand University, and they were actually using our dining areas for the university during the day, so we can only sort of use the hotel dining stuff in the evening. But this is one of the first things we saw when we went for a walk around Christchurch itself, and that to me was symptomatic of the damage that was done. It's just extraordinary. This thing was a bit like a London tower. That a clock had been presented to the city of Christchurch, and that whole tower had been picked up and rotated 20 odd degrees and then dropped down again. And needless to say, it was in a pretty precarious situation. And that bent spire at the top was to me my main sort of recollection of the damage, because the stuff was just appalling. There were all these fences all the way around all these buildings. Obviously, these are the really solid ones, the churches and whatnot. It's just phenomenal the amount of damage that was done. And in fact, there's only 150 people died. It's quite extraordinary that so few people did die. It was 2 months before we were there. It was a magnitude of 6.3. It was only 10 kilometres south of Christchurch that it took place. The 10,000 homes were demolished and 100,000 were damaged. And in fact, there's an interesting website you can get onto now called the before and after, and they've got exactly the same photographs as I've got, and then they move a bar across the photograph and it's how it is today. So the ones that have been repaired and haven't been repaired. And if you're interested in any of that sort of stuff, it really is quite phenomenal. It was an unusual situation. For example, there were 300 police volunteers came from Australia, and it's the first time ever that the police from all the states of Australia have all worked together under one sort of leadership. They had to sign authority for the New Zealanders and whatnot. But not only there were police from UK, Thailand, Taiwan, Israel, amazing number of people that had turned up, and everywhere you went, there were these sort of areas closed off with either police or soldiers, though of course there was virtually, I never heard anything or saw any looting or anything like that you hear about in other countries, but even so it was quite phenomenal. And we were walking within 4 or 5 feet of the buildings, and I can remember saying to John, for goodness sake, I hope there's not going to be another quake or another shake, because we would have been severely hurt ourselves. Now, one of the first things we got to was and one of the reasons we were going over there was because we were hoping to see an Anson flying for the first time ever, and it was of recent days at the air show. And so we got to this, Reed Heslop helicopters, and we got there and we couldn't find it. We went up to the house, no one was there. We didn't pass the sort of the helicopter pad, and then we come down and looked through the windows and we could see that this had been repaired. And eventually someone came out and said, "What are you looking at?" Now this is the Anson that they're restoring now. Just incredible quality of the workmanship that they're doing. And this was, as I say, 14 or 15 months ago now, so hopefully it has been flying. We had hoped to have it to see it at the Omaka Air Show ourselves, but we didn't. But as I say, the standard of the workmanship was just phenomenal. Apart from the fact it's one of the cleanest workshops I've ever seen in my life. You could eat your breakfast off the floor almost, you know. As you can see, the amount of work that must have gone into it, the expense that must have been involved, it's quite extraordinary. And this, that's one of the engines we got one of these out at the museum, and in fact we took it up to the air show, and unfortunately they went and parked the balloon about 50 metres behind where we had the chieftain engine. So I went and spoke to the squad leader, the chap that was responsible for landing at Royal Perth Golf Club, and Kareen, I believe, for some weird and wonderful reason. But anyway, I went up to him, I said, do you mind if we run the cheetah? Yeah, no problems at all. And no sooner we started it up, and some wing commander, CEO of the Roulettes, came over and told us off, so we had to shut it down, so we weren't allowed to run the motor again, so which was a bit disappointing, but never mind. And this is the armaments on the Anson. I mean, I know most of them are used for nav trainers, but as I say, that's so that was that thing. Now the Omaka Air Show itself, this theme, and there's a couple of guys here, Ron Peters and George Moranis is not here, but certainly we got there for the show, and the theme was V for Victory, and it's a wonderful collection of old aircraft. There were 7 World War I aircraft in the fly past. We started off with the Kiwi paratroopers coming in with the flag, etc. From then on, we started having all these aircraft, one after the other. And as you can see from these things, they were just brilliant quality. These are all the ground shots. Sopwith Camel, 5,500 built. It's called a Camel because of the hump of the gun over the top, and that's how it got the nickname Camel. They were particularly dangerous to fly because the whole motor rotates, and we've got one at the Aviation Museum, the electric button you press and the whole thing rotates, and of course, if you know, with the gyroscopic effect, as you pull the control column back, then it wants to go sideways, go through 90 degrees, and they lost more pilots through training than they lost through actual combat. And I was just doing a quick bit of research the other day, and there was 3, or he commented that they were renowned for either getting a wooden cross, a red cross, or a Victoria Cross. And the Australian ace on these things was Major William Barker. He got 46 kills. The next one was Sopwith Pup. There were nearly 1,770 of those built. Harry Hawker was the test pilot from Hawker de Havilland. This is before he set up his own company. And it's also the first aircraft to ever land on an aircraft carrier. Land in, and obviously not without a catapult to get it going in those days, but this one was built in 1961 itself. That they're obviously not originals, they're the replicas, so this in itself is 50 years old, which is quite something. The next one was a Bristol 2B, Brisbane, or Biff was its nickname. Nearly 5,500 of these were built, and in those days cost £1,350. So as you can see, it's a bit different to what today's are. It's one of the few 2-seaters around. That's another shot of it as it's taxiing past us. The next one we saw was a Sopwith triple-plane or triplane. Only 147 of these were built. It was replaced by the Sopwith Camel. It wasn't very popular and wasn't very successful, but survives the air show. And then we get to the German ones, Albatros DVA for the Imperial German Air Service. 2,500 were those built, and they were replaced by the Fokker D11. They apparently were subject to wind failures, so weren't very popular. Another shot of it flying. And then, as I say, the theme of the show was Winston Churchill and V for Victory. So he turned up in this Miles Messenger, which I must admit when we were first looking at, Brian and I didn't know what it was. But a Miles Messenger M38, 1942 to 1948, 93 of them were built, and it was for air observation. And in fact, it's the same motor as the Gypsy Moth. But as I say, Winston was walking around inspecting the troops. They had First World War, Second World War, they had tanks, they had ambulances, they had trucks, they had buses, they had everything. It's quite extraordinary. Guns, dogs, you name it, it was all there sort of thing. So what have we got there? Supermarine Spitfire, yep. And then we got Russian aircraft, the Russian Yak. Messerschmitt 108. As I say, there was an extraordinary number of aircraft there, all of which were flying. 885 of these things built. The Russian one, there was that could, in fact, this one they reckon could call +7 and -5G. This one was the 1,800 of these were built. And of course, this one surprised me as to how noisy, well, not the noise, but the size of it. I always imagined it to be quite small machines. These are the ones that used to make the screaming noise. It took a dive bomber, Junkers Ju-87. This was built in, or they were first built in 1936, 6,500, and nicknamed Jericho Trumpet of all things. They were initially built in Sweden because subject to the limitations of what Germany could do during the First World War, and they were built under license in Sweden, technically speaking. Of course, they were German from start through to finish. But anyway, and then as soon as Hitler got enough power, then he just dragged them back into Germany. Fokker 190 or Focke-Wulf 190. There were 20,000 of these built. Fighter bomber, ground attack, and this was had the upper hand on the Spitfire until they came up with the Mark 9, and then they got back to seniority again, or superiority again. Now, because poor old George McManus is not here today, but that's George sitting in the cockpit. And this guy down here is the editor of the Wings magazine, so he was a very good source of information. So that was the Mustang, the 1942 one. There were, it's amazing, at 25,000 feet, 457 miles per hour, because in those days they didn't have oxygen supply or anything like that, so it's amazing they could get up to that height. Had a range of 1,650 miles and would go up Mach 0.8. 6 machine guns they had on board as well, 12.7 kil. Then we had the Corsair, carrier fighter, 12,571 of these were built, and they were produced between 1942 and up until 1953. They were very popular aircraft. They had an interesting kill ratio of 11 to 1. Here's another one that was parked in the hangar behind us. And of course we all know what this one is, the double sunrise machine, the old Catalina, which we have one in the museum. There were 4,051 of those built. Cost $90,000 in 1935. Double sunrise. Another one of the Kitty Hawk again. That's the 30 P40 this time. 13,738 of those were built. And they cost $44,892 to build in 1944. They could cruise at 29,000 feet, much the same sort of speed, 360 miles per hour with 650 miles range. They also had 6 cannons on board, 12.7 millimetres, so they were fairly sizable guns. Same machine. Well, the other thing that was interesting about the airfield was the fact that there was a vineyard in the background. I didn't realise the Kiwis were so prolific at producing wine. In fact, what was more annoying was to go to the supermarket and see Australian wines at a cheaper price I could have buy them for in Coles down here, which is unbelievable. But as I say, their vineyards were huge compared with ours, and this was half the airfield was a vineyard in this place. Another one of the Spitfire. 29,351 of these were built. I think there was something like 26 different marks altogether. £12,000 cost to build. They had a height of 43,500 feet. So how they survived up there, God only knows. They also had 6 guns, 6 brings. There are 35 variations of the Spitfire again. That includes the maritime one as well as the land operations. And we're talking about what Brian showed us about that Spitfire they found in the desert. You probably heard that in Burma they've only recently discovered that 20 are definitely buried, and they were buried to hide them from the Germans. And they were still brand spanking new, wrapped in plastic and in the boxes, and they've definitely found 20, and there's a possibility there's another 36. And the intention is the British are going to restore them all, take them all back to the UK and get them all back in flying condition again. So that'll be interesting if that comes up. There'll be a slight difference. There'll be an extra 56 Spitfires into the system. I think there's about 105 at the moment flying. As I say, they had all bits and pieces. Cessna Bird Dog, that was relatively recent, 1950 to 1974. There were 3,400 of those built. They had a ceiling of 20,000 feet. Pretty slow machines, 130 miles per hour, range of 530 knots. And then as so we go back to a few years before that, Hawker de Havilland Dragon Rapide, short haul airliner, 1934, 731 of these were built. That only had an operating height of 16,700 feet. There's a few Texans in formation. As I say, they had World War I, World War II, and everything else in between, and they really were most impressive. And as for low flying, I reckon if you could put your fingers up, you'd scratch the paint off. The bloody Kiwis don't take any notice of rules and regulations. They're quite fun. In fact, I remember there was an instructor at Pierce when I was there, and I remember him saying to someone, for Christ's sake, fly over the sheep, not under it, boy. But it was very spectacular, I must admit. Now the museum itself, it's, you know, I thought it was just an air show, but the actual museum itself at Omaka is financed by Peter Jackson, the movie maker. And the quality of the stuff in there is just phenomenal. I mean, this is the brochure from the place, and in this area itself, and the quality of the museum pieces are just outstanding. They've got 16 separate aircraft: Caproni CA-22, Ettrich Taube, DH-2, Fokker Eindegger, Morani Solaire BB, Bristol Fighter, RE-8, Breguet 14, Halberstadt D-14, Albatross B-2, Gotha and Vimy models, SE-5A, Fokker triplanes, Snow Scene with a Newport 27, Death of the Red Baron, and that's just some of them. As I say, the quality of the display was absolutely outstanding. And this apparently is a reproduction. I'll pass this around, you can have a look at that as well. This is a reproduction of the Red Baron going in, and apparently they took photographs of the actual incident and created this situation here. And I mean, not only were the aircraft so realistic, but the mannequins were such, you could almost go up to them and start talking to them. They were so realistic. And not only that, they had these, I don't know what you call them really, but they had the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, all his stuff. They had American Ace, Eddie Rickenbacker. They had bits and pieces of clothing and medals and bits. The Frenchman's Ace, René Fonck. The American Ace had 26 kills, René Fonck had 75. And then the German Ace, Ernest Uday, 62, Max Immelmann, 15, Oswald Boelke, 40, Hermann Göring, 21. And Hermann Göring's jacket and infamous hat that he had on for the Nuremberg trial, they're all the bits and pieces there that he's acquired and collected. Now this is an incredible story. I'll read you out what actually took off one of the Fliers. This guy got involved in an incident and then thought, well, I'm going to get out of the aircraft because they didn't have parachutes. The Brits decided that they weren't going to give the First World War pilots any parachutes because they didn't want them leaving their aircraft and fight until the last minute, which was a bit grim. On one occasion in September 1918, and this guy's name is Keith Logan, Grid Caldwell. On one occasion in September 1918, Keith's quick thinking and resourceful nature saved him from certain death. Whilst on a patrol, another SE-5A struck his aircraft, catastrophically damaging his wing struts and altering the aircraft's aerodynamics. Instantly, his fighter plummeted 1,000 feet and went into a flat spin. Keith knew he was doomed if he didn't attempt something special, so he stepped his left leg out onto the port wing and grabbed hold of the strut with his left hand, attempting to balance the aircraft by changing the centre of gravity. Keith continued to fly the aircraft with his right hand on the joystick. With only 500 feet left, he realised it was hopeless, but this activity allowed him to guide his aircraft away from the enemy territory and over the British lines, and just as the plane was about to impact with the ground, Keith jumped, clearing the wreck and getting up to find he landed in front of a British infantry dugout. Astonished soldiers saw him get up, dust himself off, and walk towards them as if nothing had happened. Escaping his flat spin, guiding the plane away from enemy lines, and then jumping clear at the last minute and walking away from the crash is nothing short of a miracle. We say that again, and he finished up in the New Zealand services in World War II. He was a station commander. I think he finished up wing commander or something like that. But, you know, absolutely bizarre story. As I say, RE-8 Flyer reconnaissance bomber, 4,077 of these built in 1916. Then the other thing they had was their workshop. And it was so realistic, you know, you could almost, as you're walking past, say, here you go, mate, do you want a cup of coffee or something like that? It's just phenomenal. I mean, the museum we got here at Bull Creek is the biggest museum in the Southern Hemisphere, but the quality of the stuff we've got is not a patch on the standard of workmanship for these things. It's just quite remarkable. Once again, this is various medals and uniforms and crosses and diaries and logbooks and bits and pieces like that. I dread to think what they're worth, you know. As I went to Omaka thinking I was just going to see a flying show, not to see a museum like this as well. De Havilland DH4. What do we say about that one? Designed by Geoffrey de Havilland, 1,449 built in 1917, 22,000 foot range, and it had 303 Vickers forward guns and 303 Lewis facing rearward. So that was the reason that was reasonably successful.
Yeah, that range seems awfully short. It's only a couple of miles.
What was that?
22,000 feet range.
No, I did it. My apologies. Okay, you're not listening, Charlie. All right. Okay. Now, this was the badge that you could buy, and then because we get to the Mosquito, and this is John was saying, we're going to see John Smith's Mosquito. I thought, yeah. So we drive into this farm, and as you get through the front gates, there's these things off to one side, and there's his shed. And we could just get in the door, and once we got in the door, what do we see? But the nose of a mosquito. All right, and as you can see, it's all black around there. Bear in mind, this is my flash has sort of shown this up. Fortunately, I had a tripod, single pole tripod. I put the camera up the top with a 10-second delay and took photographs. We could see a Spitfire in the background and other bits and pieces. It was absolutely jam-packed with aircraft. This is John Hinton climbing into the cockpit, and this is he's had that. He purchased it. Back in 1956. It was built in Coventry in 45. The RAF sold it to INZF in 47, and John bought it in 1956, and it's been stuck in his shed ever since. What it's worth, goodness only knows, because it, you know, he's quite an old chap. I can't imagine how much longer he's going to hang on. But there were Berlin engines, there were cartons of equipment, electronic gear, tyres, wings, canopies. It was an absolute hodgepodge of bits and pieces, and that's the old guy at the end. In fact, when we got there, you know, we knocked on the door and he opened it. He sort of looked through, and he said, it was only because he knew one of the other guys that he let us in. But that was me giving him a copy of our calendar. Now, once again, we're going for a drive around South Island, and everywhere we stopped was some sort of museum. And the guy said, okay, do you want to go look at the Toy and Transport Museum? I was museumed out by then, and I can remember I made a few rude comments. What's it going to cost? $5. Oh, okay. Well, I can't believe it. When we got inside, this is a private collection, okay, and it's in Wanaka. It is the largest collection in the Southern Hemisphere. Mr. Joel Rhodes' private collection. There are 50,000 items in there. He's been collecting for 50 years. There's 6,000 vehicles. 30 fire engines, 30,000 toys, 2,000 teddy bears. There's a Russian Antonov AN-2, which is the largest single-engine aircraft in the world. He's got ambulances, Buicks, trucks, cranes, tractors, motorbikes. Just phenomenal. And I had no idea it existed. It was just extraordinary. Right, now, just going backwards, we're nearly finished now. Just going backwards to the show itself, they had, as I say, troop carriers and tanks and guns and motorbikes and you name it, everything was there. And this was a troop carrier. And of course there's all the guys dressed up in the period uniform and all that sort of stuff as well. And this is an ambulance for World War I. And as you can see, there's a Jeep behind it. But my grandfather actually, I got two grandfathers, both in the First World War. My father was in the Second World War. And my grandfather drove one of these ambulances, so I thought that was particularly interesting. And then, to my surprise, we get down to Wanaka, and as I say, the Wanaka show alternates with the Omaka, and there wasn't much in the Wanaka show, but what there was in there was a London transport bus, you see. And guess what? I was born at 19 Huntsville Street, Lower Tooting. And guess what? Tooting, Balham, gateway to the south. You know, Wimbledon, Hampton Court, Kingston. My grandfather drove that bus for 46 years. Yeah, couldn't believe it. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.